I was 8 months sober from everything, porn, alcohol, drugs. I was completely sober from the whole lot, but I was miserable. So I spent a little time in a mental health hospital under a section where it's a point of suicidal crisis. What's wrong with me? I don't fit with AA or NA or CA and this group. I'm being told that this is how it is. You just need to, all these kind of key statements you hear, like close your mouth and open your ears. It's a bit aggressive and it's a bit culty. And, my sponsor is the sponsor of the original sponsor of this person. There's this grand lineage and they're the messiah. And some of the people in the rooms, they've got 10, 15, 20 years sobriety under their belts, continuous abstinence from whatever it is, but they're miserable. So again, I looked at that and I'd go, well, what? I've got to be miserable now? I've got to be unhappy, but sober? And that's what I tried to force over the 8 months, which led to me being sectioned. It was very much like, I'll show you lot, this cool. I'm 8 months sober and I'm going to take my own life.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lipwitz, and with over 12 years of meditation experience as a mindfulness trainer and coach for high performers, I've become obsessed with helping people break free from compulsive, unhealthy behaviors and addictions and step into a life of true freedom so that they can finally become their best selves and cultivate deeper and lasting fulfillment. I've created Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to master your mind and optimize your life. This is Unhooked. My guest today is Ryan Ridgway. Ryan is a former deputy manager for the NHS 111 service and a mental health first aid trainer. From a young age, Ryan struggled with distressing compulsive thoughts, which later gave way to depression, addiction, and resulted in planning suicide. Since then, Ryan has learned how to manage his mental health through various support systems, outlets, and proactive tools. These include teaching, sharing his story, boxing, and MMA. Ryan is extremely passionate about sharing his story and helping others on their well-being journey. He uses his lived experience to facilitate open and honest discussions and help others feel more comfortable sharing their own stories around mental health and well-being. He has worked in mental health full-time for 10 years, but what he feels qualifies him the most is his own journey of mental illness and addiction. So, stay tuned. All right, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Unhooked. Very excited to have a new guest on the show today, someone who is a fan of the podcast, and I'm a fan of his work. So welcome, Ryan, to the show.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, huge fan. I'm not paid to say that, but, your podcast from back in 2022 is something that's kind of supported me and guided me on my journey. So it's great to meet you. Really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I try to do on my podcast is, be an open book, talk about my struggles, hoping that me talking about my struggles will help other people feel comfortable to talk about their own and to not feel alone. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that you do on your channels is really sharing about your experiences and your history. And you're just a real open book. So I'd love to just dive in. And if you could just tell the audience, a little bit about the work you do and the mission you're on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It started back in, 10 years ago. I was deputy manager of the NHS 111 service, and someone said to me, do you want to be a mental health first aider? And I said, what's that? I've heard of physical first aid for accidents. Mental health first aid, is that something we're doing? Do we need that now? Did that course, fell in love with it. It connected the dots for me personally in my own journey, but sadly I was using mental health first aid, mental health support weekly, sometimes daily, compared to the handful of occasions I've ever gone to an accident and applied physical first aid. So in this modern, fast-paced, very different world, it shows how many people might want to consider their mental health, have some strategies to rebalance, and have some supports. Since leaving that service, I've pretty much taught mental health support every day. I've worked in a mental health service, but it's my own journey of not knowing I had a mental illness, because back in my day, I think I get to say that at the age of 44, sound a little bit like my dad. back in my day, you didn't talk about mental health. You didn't talk about anxiety, and you certainly didn't talk about, or people weren't aware of, what obsessive compulsive disorder was, and that kind of really connected with addictions. So it's I think that makes us all experts in the world of mental health. We've all had a journey, and when we share that in the right way with the right people, it might form part of their survival guide.
Mm. I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about when you first started recognizing that you had some mental health issues. Like, do you remember how old you were and what were some of the things you noticed?
It's probably about age 12, earliest memory, around there. And it was thoughts like, turn the light switch on and off 20 times, otherwise your parents would die. And at that age, you don't know if this is normal or usual or part of puberty and growing up. And you think, well, if there's any risk of that happening, I can turn the light switch on and off 20 times, no problem. But it escalated. And what made that really hard was the stigma, the judgment, the lack of awareness, the bullying, because you try and share those thoughts with someone who doesn't understand. And you do get the comments, you're crazy, you're weird, psycho, etc. And it just pushes you into the shadows. You start to hide those behaviors, hide those thoughts from others. And, connected to lots of different spaces. So probably about age 12, I think to some degree, I'd always had those thoughts, but, that was the earliest memory.
So there was kind of a recognition that you were different in some way and that there was something a little bit kind of screwed up going on inside.
Yeah, one day the thoughts were like, do sit-ups, do 20 sit-ups. And I got to 20 sit-ups and it was like, no, do more. There's always some horrific outcome if I didn't carry out that compulsion. I did sit-ups all day that day. I tore all the muscles in my stomach. I had to have 3 weeks off school, in a fetal position in bed.
Wow.
But because this wasn't recognised, people were like, you silly lad. What do you think was happening? There was lots of like judgment, even professionally, like, why did you do that for? Rather than a recognition of what is the thought that drove that emotion, that compulsion, it was just kind of dismissed.
And where do you know where these thoughts come from? Like the idea I need to do these sit-ups or I need to turn on and off these lights in order to save my parents, or do you know where those thoughts come from?
I don't, other than it's an illness, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and there's lots of different subcategories of that. It was just that it was an illness, so I don't think there was any particular trigger. Because mental illness it can run in the family, it can be, hereditary. My dad's got OCD, for example, a cousin has, so there's a trend there. But no, I can't think of any one like traumatic experience or where they started. They just were.
Yeah. Wow. How did that? It sounds like it kind of rolled into addiction later on. I'm curious, what are some of your like earlier experiences with addiction, and then how did it progress?
Lots of different things. Like you always shared on the podcast, it's not a linear journey. Sometimes it was escapism from the thoughts. What can I use temporarily to get relief from how I'm feeling right now? There's no one kind of trend, but the addiction has moved around different spaces. One thing that's always been consistent, though, the core addiction was around pornography, which is why I found great relief on your podcast, because you and your guests were talking about things that people weren't willing to talk about. They weren't recognizing. It wasn't a thing. It was almost like society would celebrate this stuff, especially amongst men. It's like normal and usual. And I was like, but that's the core consistency that's run throughout all of my addictions is porn use.
Mm. Yeah, it's one of those ones. It's very strange because even certain kinds of addiction and recovery things can be celebrated. We celebrate someone who's a former alcoholic and in recovery, or former drug addict. But then when it comes to sex addiction or porn addiction or any of these kind of related ones, there's this weird kind of shameful side of it, this taboo aspect that we don't talk about it, we suppress it, we kind of shove it under the rug and pretend it's not there. But it sounds like for you, it was one of the early ones.
Absolutely. Like your journey that you've openly shared, it was one of those things from a very early age. You come across, it was a topless kind of calendar that you had back up on walls of garages back in the day. And I found one of those. I was like, wow, this this changes the way I feel. What's this? And you're curious at that age. You're like,
Yeah.
what's going on here? And the catalogs that you talked about as well, the lingerie section in the catalogs, it's readily available. It's there. You don't really know what's going on inside to make you feel that and feel good and that uplift and that dopamine. And it's just so available. I love what you've said on one of the podcasts before about, it's got 3 A's that no other addictions ever really had. It's accessible, it's affordable, it's anonymous, and you can't assign those 3 A's to any other addiction: gambling, cocaine, alcohol, and it's scary. It's got those 3 things, 3 commonalities that no other addictions ever had.
Right. Yeah. It's one of the, it's one of the things that makes it such a challenging addiction, and just it gets so deeply rooted, is just how isolated it can become, because of that anonymity. It's the type of thing we do by ourselves. It's like we go into our room, whatever, we hide it from other people. And so it really can creep in there and be one of those early ones. And I love how you say it can just start as this normal thing. You see a picture and it's like, whoa, this thing makes me feel good when I look at this picture. And it's such a simple, it's a part of our physiology, to normalize and understand where it comes from. It's not we're not perverted, we're not broken. It's just, oh, when I see these images, it does something inside me that gives me a little rush of feeling good. And of course, we're going to, use that as a coping mechanism down the road.
Absolutely. And the changes we've seen as well, back in my day, it was the old VHS, or, it was a magazine. And then there's been a transition now of the internet and it being there available. And one of the generation previously, could you go and see image after image or video after video and get that dopamine spike? Like it's evolved to a point where it's something that it is inherent. We're supposed to go out and look and feel and all these kind of things that are like, well, that's normal, right? But when does normal become not normal for me? When's it tip? Or when's it now become a problem? 1% per day through the back door, and suddenly now this is an issue. Where do I go to talk about that? Because CA, AA, NA, SA, it doesn't quite fit. It's very much you're in or out. That was my experience, and there's nothing wrong with any of those rooms. They help thousands of people. They're great, but it just didn't quite fit for me with where do I belong? Where's my tribe? Where's my people of sharing a similar struggle where I can go and talk about this without shame or guilt or feeling bad? That balance.
Well, I'd love to hear more about your experience in some of these 12-step programs, but I want to just explore a little bit of your story a bit more. So from porn, it sounds like it did escalate into other kinds of addictions. What were some of the things that it then grew into?
Substances, mostly, cocaine use, alcohol. It was almost like a very, very clever, sneaky addiction, because your brain will start to find ways of enhancing that experience, right? So you might go on a night out and then you come back, you're under the influence of alcohol or whatever. You're like, oh, I know what I fancy doing now. I'm on my own. It's late at night. I'm drunk, whatever. Let's put on porn. And then you can start to combine these addictions, enhance these addictions. Even I've come across lots of men who, steroid misuse, and steroids, testosterone, they increase the sexual desire. So people are going on steroids just to enhance pornography use, or using cocaine or alcohol to enhance pornography use. But the core key thing is pornography. That's the thing that kind of it sits around or enhances.
Yeah, it's there at such a deep primal level for so many men. I mean, even if people think, oh, my thing is alcohol, or my thing is kind of some other substances or drugs like this, there's almost just this undercurrent of our sexual kind of desire and craving that is driving a lot of it underneath the surface.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, more and more men, not limited to, of course, but over the 10 years, more and more men are approaching me and saying, oh, I think I've got a bit of an issue, a concern around this thing. And it's not quite that, or it's not quite that, but it's pornography. It's sex. And it's not even actually sex. They say, look, I've not got any extreme behaviors causing me concern in that space. It's not like I'm seeking out prostitution or, I don't want to be a cheat. I've got a partner. That's not me. That's not the kind of man I want to be. But actually, I'm going into this space because it's so easy. It's risk-free in terms of, I'm not cheating on anyone. But it's a problem because I'm cancelling plans with friends. I'm lying. I'm creeping around. I'm procrastinating. I'm just doing all these little things that don't sit well with me of the kind of man that I want to be. So it's a very sneaky addiction, I think. It's a very clever addiction. Oh, you against you. How do you beat yourself? It's within me and I'm trying to beat me. And it just gets very, very confusing.
I think that sneaky aspect is one of the reasons it's such a hard one to address, is because it is so subtle. It's so subtle and so hard to really detect what it is that's causing these issues. With some other kind of drug addiction, it might be very serious consequences that oh, this is because of the heroin. But with porn, it's like these subtle consequences that build up over time. They affect the way that your mind works, your relationships. So it really is, more challenging because of that, because it's not so obvious.
Absolutely. And, if that's the way I get my excitement, my dopamine, that's my fix, and I'm doing that over a prolonged period of time, then the everyday enjoyment in life can become flat and boring and numb. And, going for a coffee with a friend or a walk, it's not quite cutting it anymore because I've had this excitement, this dopamine, this quick fix. And there's a great book where it talks about the trance state of addiction. And it's almost like from the point when you decide on this day at this time, I've got a bit of privacy, I can go and watch porn. That's it then. It's hijacked your kind of day or your week or your month. All those other little things in life now, boring, nothingness. I'm just focused on that one point when I get to do that thing that my brain's telling me is the maximum high. So it's not just in the moment of doing it. It's the build up, the decision of, I'm going to do this then. So I can't wait to get to that point.
Yeah, that trance state, one of the ways that I've described it is just that tunnel vision where, we get so constricted and all we see or think about is acting out. And just as you say, it's like you lose the ability to enjoy anything else that's going well in your life because all you're focused on is getting that hit, later on in your bedroom. I'd love to know, what was the turning point for you in your life? Like, was there a moment, some kind of a rock bottom, or some kind of experience where you woke up and said, okay, I can't keep living like this?
The rock bottom really was being sectioned. So I spent a little time in a mental health hospital under a section where it was a point of suicidal crisis. But interestingly, what led me to that point, I was 8 months sober from everything, porn, alcohol, drugs. I was completely sober from the whole lot, but I was miserable. And that's because I was in the rooms of AA and CA. And even though it didn't quite completely fit, you were told what to think, how to feel. If you shared any struggle, you weren't being honest. And I was being really honest. And I just want to go back to saying those rooms are great. They help so many people. But I found or fell in with a bit of a toxic group where they wouldn't sponsor you if you're on medication for mental illness, because back when these books, I think 1935, the Alcoholics Anonymous original book was written, mental illness didn't exist. It wasn't really talked about. There's some symptoms of depression. So their view was, all of our problems are around addiction. Let's remove the addiction. You're going to live happy, healthy, well, and free. And I wasn't. I was 8 months sober, but absolutely miserable. So that was a bit of a real turning point. There was loads of other factors going on as well. It wasn't just that. But that was the point where, I kind of knew that. And I'd worked in mental health for 6 years by that point, but my head was my own worst enemy. My head said to me, don't tell anyone you're struggling because they'll think you can't do your job. So it forced me into more isolation, more secrecy, until a point when I needed life-saving intervention. I needed people to reach in and, you know, have a kind conversation. So that was probably the lowest point, and a bit of a turning point. But I think with addiction like this, there can be loads of turning points on that journey. It's not a linear journey. You learn little bits, you know, little bits of experience. You go, okay, I can explore this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember one person said to me once that there is no rock bottom. There's always like a trap door where you can open up and go further down. You know, there's all these, as you say, these little turning points, these rock bottoms that we hit at various points. And, you know, there's always a potential for worse or to go back there. But they help us see things more clearly. I'd love to hear what that experience was like for you, you know, being sectioned and really being in the midst of a suicidal crisis. As you look back on it, what was it like?
Oh, it was awful. It was a lesson. It was a learning, but it was pretty terrible. You know, feeling very, very alone, and even being sectioned, it shows how dated some of the support can be. You know, I was on a mattress on an office floor with my shoelaces taken out of my trainers, with someone kind of guarding the door that if I'd have wanted to break free, I could have broke free. And then it was being dosed up on the maximum amount of medication. So I was safe because I was numb, but there was very little aftercare. There was very little check-ins, appointments, you know, let's refer you to a psychologist. There was sadly none of that. And that is heartbreaking, because that was only 4 years ago. It was March 23rd, 4 years ago. And not a lot has changed in the world of mental health support, which is why I think we need to take some ownership, you know, seek out podcasts like yours and look at our own individual journeys. And there's nothing wrong with medication. You know, I'll be on medication for life, but if I just took tablets and did nothing else, I'm still going to be really poorly. My mental illness and addiction is still going to have a very real negative hold on my life. If I take my medication and do the other things and work out my journey, then I can, you know, you wouldn't know I've got a mental illness unless I told you. So I can live happy, healthy, and well. But no, it was a pretty dark time. You know, it was a pretty hard time, and there was very little kind of support to get through and past that.
So you were on this journey with 12 steps, and you were 8 months sober from everything. And that's when you found yourself at kind of the darkest. What was it that you didn't have access to? What was it that was missing for you?
What was missing was, well, first of all, a conversation around this porn addiction, which was the key thread that ran through all of it. And it was very much, it's our way or no way. You know, you're either in or you're out, and you need to meditate harder. I was meditating 4 hours a day. But with OCD, you know, the thoughts, the catastrophizing, the apocalyptic thinking, you've locked me in my head for 4 hours with that, and no recognition that, you know, for OCD, sometimes meditation is not the solution or the answer. So it was these very basic set of tools without any conversation about all the other things that can help. And it was a lot of judgment. And this is, you know, one unique group. There's so many great spaces out there with AA, CA, NA, SA. But there's very little conversation for anything else. And, you know, you're either in or you're out. It either fit or it didn't. You weren't getting honest, or you need to go and make an amends or apology to someone, even though that didn't feel right and it wasn't a great experience. It was just very basic. They called it a clear-cut direction. They went very much back to the basics of A. This is how the original people did it. This is how we're going to do it. And there is nothing outside of that. And you told things like, look for the similarities, not the differences. You know, if you say, well, this doesn't quite feel right for me, you know, where's the talk about porn addiction and stuff? Look for the similarities, not the differences. You could take me to a Morris dancing or line dancing convention and tell me to look for the similarities, and I'd find some. It still doesn't mean I've got anything relatable to line dancing or Morris dancing. You know, just very, very one view, linear. This is how we do it. Do not question it. Do not go outside of it. So it's a lack of all the other tools. What was needed was an open, kind conversation to explore my journey as a unique journey, and suggestions, signposting.
Yeah. Yeah, it can definitely. So I've never really. I've attended a handful of sessions in 12 step, but it never really spoke to me. Mostly because of the higher power thing. I've been
Yeah.
kind of a non-believer since I was born, and it's very hard for me to drop into anything that feels kind of religious, and it is quite. It can feel a bit culty, for me. Kind of how
Yeah.
strict it is, and how, as you say, this is our way, and these are the rules, and these are the steps, and um, yeah, and I think, as you say, it can work for some people, and for some people it's life saving, right? But I
Yeah.
think also to normalize for anyone out there listening that if you've tried it and it doesn't resonate with you, it doesn't feel like your tribe, that's okay. You
Yeah.
don't have to. It's not something's wrong with you. It's just might not be your tribe, and there are other pathways to recovery out there that might work better for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's other pathways, there's other tribes, there's other people. Because when you come out of that, if it doesn't quite fit, you can lose hope. And if anyone loses hope, that can be a really dangerous space. What's wrong with me? I don't fit with AA or NA or CA. And, this group, I'm being told that this is how it is. And you just need to, all these kind of key statements you hear, like, close your mouth and open your ears. It's a bit aggressive and it's a bit culty. And, my sponsor is the sponsor of the original sponsor of this person. There's this grand lineage and they're the Messiah. And some of the people in the rooms, they've got 10, 15, 20 years sobriety under their belts, continuous abstinence from whatever it is, but they're miserable.
Hmm.
So again, I looked at that and I'd go, well, what? I've got to be miserable now. I've got to be unhappy, but sober. And that's what I tried to force over the 8 months, which led to me being sectioned. It was very much like, I'll show you lot, this cool. I'm 8 months sober and I'm going to take my own life. It was almost like this grandiose, like, I'll
Active
show you.
rebellion, almost kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really dangerous. So I love what you said there. There's other people out there. There's other groups. There's if it doesn't fit and it doesn't sit right with you, try a virtual group in America. Jump online. If you don't fit with that group, do not force it. Do not be told that this is the way it is. Explore with self-compassion, with kindness. You'll find your group. Take little bits from each group. You don't have to be with one group and that's it. I'll go to NA every now and again because I think it's more relaxed and it considers the whole person, the whole journey. But of course, porn isn't a narcotic. So again, it doesn't quite fit. So take the things that feel right for you. It doesn't mean you don't belong. I mean, there's no hope. There's lots out there.
I think you brought up the topic of hope, and I was reflecting on this the other day that I think I think it's one of the most important things you need in recovery is hope. Because when you have no hope, it's so hard to just kind of just be there and believe in that future that, okay, this is going to get better. If I put in the work, if I do something, if I reach out, if I get connected, it will get better. But if you don't have that hope, if you just think this is pointless, I've always been this way, I'm always going to be this way, that is like, it's the worst thing because it prevents you from putting in any effort to actually changing your situation.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We talk about that all the time in, mental health support and awareness in my teaching. When someone loses hope, and that was me, over those 8 months. If I can't fix me, what chance is there? I work in mental health. I've got a great network, resources. I've tried different groups. I'm in this group and I lost hope. I thought there's no point. There is always hope. There's always someone out there that can be that guiding light. And found your podcast, thankfully, your guests, and took little bits from each one and practically applied it. And that kindness as well, that relapses happen. They do. It's part of the journey of this. Whereas in the rooms, what I found is very judgmental. They've relapsed again. They did 3 months. Oh, why have you relapsed? What weren't you getting on it over? Why you weren't doing it hard enough? What are you missing? It felt very judgmental. It's actually, before we should ask someone, I think, how long have you been sober? I want to ask them, are you happy? How are you feeling? To that, it's like, oh, I'm on 3 months, I'm on 6 months. Celebrate those wins, absolutely, but don't hang everything on that, because when the person does, if they relapse, it can be a hard fall back. It's on your podcast again, I learned, it's about how you come forward. You can stay with that, or we can reflect on that with some self-compassion. What are we going to do next? How are we going to move forward? It doesn't undo the 3 months or the 6 months. That's still there. It's locked in. You've got that. But what we do next, that's the key.
Yeah. So well said. It really breaks my heart how much people put, so much of an emphasis on their sobriety date or their streak, and this is the last time I acted out. And it's like, to just be kind to yourself and say, okay, I'm making steady progress. Sometimes there's up, sometimes there's down, but the overall trend is in the right direction. And like you say, one of the things that I felt, when I've been in some of these 12-step groups, just as you say, it's like people might be sober, but they just feel kind of like wound up and miserable a lot of the time. And for me, it's like I so much would rather just have an approach that is kind and compassionate and gentle and forgiving and, easygoing. And yeah.
Totally. That's it. You can kind of see it and feel it in the rooms where someone might have had a really long journey of sobriety, but they're just not great. And there's all this terminology like dry drunk or recovery zombie and this unkind terminology. But yeah, I'd rather be happy. I'd rather be happy and be on this lifelong. It's a journey, not a destination, right? Let's just lifelong journey and improve forward, be the person or man I want to be. If I'm doing that, then the date, it's less important.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to turn this whole episode into just like shitting on 12 steps, but I guess just to kind of like finish out this topic, like one of the, for people listening, and I guess this is kind of why I think it might be helpful to go into, is there are a lot of people listening who are on the fence and kind of like, is this right or not? And having people like you and me kind of talk about our views on it. Because I've had people who are firmly 12-step, proponents and believers on the podcast as well. And I honor those people and their paths. But for me, it's like one of the other things that just, it's hard for me to really drop into it. Is just this, I am an addict kind of statement and label of like, I am an addict and I am powerless. And something about it just doesn't feel right to me. Like, for me, what was really powerful in my recovery was recognizing this isn't who I am, and I am more powerful than this thing, and I can actually train my mind and strengthen my mind and overcome this thing. And it's not a death sentence. It's not a life sentence. It's this is because of the causes and conditions. This is because of how I've trained my mind. And I can actually just rewire my mind and change the nature of my subconscious thoughts with intentional practice. And I can't imagine living out my whole life having to like remind myself on a daily basis, I'm an addict, I'm powerless. It just feels so imprisoning.
It does. That label in itself, addict, on or off, yes or no. It's just so permanent, right? And that powerlessness, I can lean on spiritual higher power. That can be meditation for me. It doesn't have to be a particular faith or God or whatever. It can be mental health, physical health, spiritual health, like a triangle. What am I doing to fulfill each space? Also in the rooms of AA as well, this allergy they talk about, that never really sat right with me. You've got an allergy. You take a substance like alcohol and it triggers this allergy where you can't stop. And I'm like, but I can stop. And the isolation for me of not being able to have one or two beers in the sunshine in the summer with friends, that isolation of I couldn't do it, that made me feel worse. I could have a couple of beers with friends in the sun and then not have this allergy triggered where I'm going to go on a 3-day bender. But what made me miserable was not being able to do that. And you're not able to explore that in the rooms. And I get it, because there's some people who maybe couldn't do that. And you want to go into these rooms and share a message of hope, right? They don't want to hear you talk about, well, actually, for me, I can have a couple of beers and that's okay. So I understand why these conversations can't happen, because they could be dangerous for some people. But for me, that very straightforward addict. You're an addict and you're powerless and you've got this allergy. I'm like, okay, if that's what you're telling me, I'll go with it. And that's what led to me being sectioned. I started to try to believe what didn't fit.
Mm. So, I mean, coming out of that, you went through this dark period, the darkest period really that anyone could experience. It sounds like you did end up finding an approach to your recovery that feels much better. And I'm curious, what is it that you practice now? Like, what was actually helpful for you coming out of that to say, this is how I'm going to approach my recovery?
It's almost a relief coming out of that, trying to force what didn't fit. And there's lots of things that helped, which again, is the podcast. It's no one fix, right? It's no one thing. So I'll see a counselor and therapist every 2 to 3 weeks. He managed a recovery service around drugs and alcohol for 20 years. He's got his own journey and he's a bit more relaxed still. So, relapses happen. Let's see what we can learn from this rather than the condemnation and judgment of you've relapsed, you've gone back to day one. So I've saw him for like 18 months and he's great. And I'm open to talk about porn addiction in that room, recognizing addiction, whether it's sugar, whether it's work, whether it's porn, whether it's a substance. So it was amazing to be able to work with him, and then building the life that I want to build, being the man that I want to be. What's that look like? Rather than focusing on trying not to be an addict, let me try and focus on, well, what do I want my life to look like? Who do I want to be? What are my values? What are my morals? How can I work towards that? Physical movement is a big one for me, but the two sides to the coin. You go and do a heavy weight session, you go and do, your high rocks or your high intensity training or whatever it might be. And I recognize a trend after I've trained heavy and hard, my testosterone goes up. So the risk of relapse, if you want to call it that, and I don't like calling it that, the risk is higher, right? I've now got heightened testosterone. I've got a higher sex drive. So I've recognized in myself the patterns, the risky times and areas, and what tools have I got in place to try to recognize and avoid that, not wrestle and fight with it. But, oh, here we go. Like the thoughts that come up rather than wrestling with them, like, oh, there it is. There's that thought, there's that like intention, that drive to go and pursue this thing that makes me feel good. I know what you're doing. I can see you. You're there. I'm just going to let it pass like a cloud in the sky.
I love that. It's one of the things that really spoke to me and resonated with me in kind of Buddhist philosophy was, instead of this, something is a sin or not a sin, like reframing it as, hey, is this action skillful? Is it wise or is it unskillful? And it's not like, oh, you're a sinner, you're a bad person if you've done this thing. It's like, hey, this was an unskillful action. And as you say, just like recognizing the patterns and saying, oh, okay, I'm starting to notice when I behave in this way, these are some of the consequences. These are some of the patterns. And is that skillful? Okay, if I have a heavy lifting session, yeah, I feel kind of more pumped up and energized. My testosterone is up. And okay, what are the consequences? So therefore, is that skillful? How do I want to behave? But it's always comes back to a choice and looking more holistically at these things of, yeah, there's pros and cons here. Like, going to the gym makes me feel good about myself and, keeps me away from maybe some other things. But there's a tipping point there. There's some nuance into understanding, can I get addicted to exercise as well? So I really love that approach. It's about the recognition of your patterns.
Yeah, that's it. The balance between the two, the recognition of patterns and just looking at the whole holistic piece to it. Because I've been addicted to the gym before, and that was mostly assigned to the fact that I got bullied at school. So I was like, right, no one's ever going to bully me again. I'm going to start boxing. And then I was looking up to, these doormen and these bodybuilders. Well, how'd you get that big? Okay, steroid misuse. That was an addiction. Just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But I wasn't happy. I wasn't aware of it. The awareness to know what are these unconscious patterns of behavior, these thinking patterns that are driving me towards that. And then the tipping point in the middle of gym's great, it's good, but I didn't recognize when it's now an addiction. an extreme, having a negative effect or consequence on my life, being driven by these thoughts that aren't helpful or healthy. I think awareness is everything.
Well, and
Being more aware.
yeah, and what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like there was a big shift, which I, sounds very familiar. Like my own story is quite the same, but a shift from instead of, okay, what are these things that are either good or bad, or what's going to give me a hit and, like pleasure, but shifting that to what's going to make me happy.
Yeah,
Is this actually going to lead to me feeling deeply fulfilled and at peace inside? Is this going to lead to, does it lead to me being happy? And so much like the point of recovery isn't about being sober and not acting out. The point of it is to live a happy, fulfilling, a life of integrity. Like that's the point of recovery. And I think that's probably why you and I kind of maybe don't resonate so much with this, the 12-step approach of just be sober and don't act out and, remember your date to like, but is that making me happy? It's like, happiness should be the goal, not sobriety.
100%. And I couldn't have told you what happy felt like years ago. I didn't know what happy was. I knew what excitement was. I knew what extremes were. I knew what, that feeling of dopamine was, but peaceful, joyful, happy, calm. I didn't know what that was or felt like. And I've had to kind of learn emotions, have
Yeah.
a greater emotional awareness. Even the difference between feeling alone and loneliness, they're two very different feelings for me. I've never been alone. Like I've been in a whole room full of people, but I felt lonely. But then I've been on my own. I've not felt loneliness. So understanding what is happy to you, what is peace, what is calm, making that the goal. Because I didn't know what that was. I didn't understand it.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I mean, you knew what excitement was. One of the things that I like to say is one of the deepest lessons I learned from my recovery from porn addiction was pleasure is not the same as happiness. And it sounds almost so simple, like, well, of course it's not. But for at least for my life, my whole strategy for approaching life was if I have more pleasure, that should make me happy. So more sex, more external validation, more creature comforts, more looking good. It's all just, okay, pleasure. I want to feel good. And realizing that happiness was something else. It was like community and connection and contentment and patience and gratitude and just being present. So many things that had nothing to do with whether something was pleasant or unpleasant.
100%. Yeah, that's it. That community, that connection, that sense of fulfillment that you talk about, and something I confused a lot in this journey, especially with porn addiction, is confusing intimacy with intensity. I didn't know the
Mm,
difference between the two. I was seeking intensity. I didn't really know what intimacy was. And they are some of the things you can get in the rooms, right? That sense of community and support, but it didn't quite fit in the rooms. I've had to create that sense of community externally. And there's some really good data and studies around, and it's pre-COVID, because sadly some countries got hit harder by COVID than others. But the three countries in the world with the most centenarians pre-COVID were Japan, Italy, and Puerto Rico. And with all the clever Google data and algorithms, I wanted to know why. Was it, something in the water? Was it daylight? Was it nutrition? Those three countries at that time only shared one commonality, and that was sense of community. And they had the most centenarians. So it is important to have and find and be part of a community where we lift each other up and support each other. And that's something that you'll find in those rooms. But if that isn't your community or your tribe, then find yours. Work out
yeah.
what yours is. Where do you get that sense of peace and fulfillment and just calm?
Yeah. And connection, I think like if it's not your tribe, it's a space where you don't necessarily feel safe or accepted. And I think that's the important part is you've got to find people where you feel you can actually be vulnerable and you're not going to be judged. You're not going to be shamed or criticized. It's like you're going to be held in a loving space. And that's what we need is, I've, for me, having a handful of friends, and I'm lucky to have a handful because I know not everybody is, but I have, a couple people that I can go to with anything, my deepest shames or whatever. And when I'm feeling most ashamed or embarrassed or low on myself, if I can just share that with these people, they don't even have to say anything, but just the act of being able to share it makes it so much better.
Yeah, 100% with the right person, the right people, unraveling thoughts, feelings, emotions, letting words hit the air and take away some of their negative power. And like you said, they don't even have to really say a lot. One of my best friends, one of my go-tos that I could share anything with, I'll be talking away and letting it all out. And then they'll just look at me and they'll just kind of nod. I feel like I've finished talking, but that little nod, I'll carry on talking and more comes out. So they almost say the least, they get the most. And I just know it's that safe space to talk without judgment.
Yeah. I know one of the things that you're really passionate about is just helping men open up about their struggles. And I'm curious, why do you think it's so hard for so many men to open up about their struggles?
This old-fashioned view of what it is to be a man. So when we look at the data and the numbers around why it is that worldwide, if someone identifies as a man, they're more likely to die by suicide. 76% of all deaths by suicide in the UK are men, 24% women. We see a similar correlation worldwide. So rather than what's going on, what's the reason, we look for the trends and the patterns. This old fashioned, we're supposed to keep it in, this inherent feeling of it's weak and we're not supposed to talk about mental health or a struggle as a man. And while we haven't got the tools to be able to talk about it, and even crying, when I was a 18 stone pro MMA fighter, if someone has said to me anything about crying, I said, I don't cry. What are you on about? I don't cry. Ridiculous. It's a human way of processing emotion. I'll be supporting men today and stuff comes up, stuff it's triggering, and they might start to get upset and they always apologize. They always say, oh, I'm sorry. I'm like, you want to apologize for laughing? Why would you apologize for crying? Please let it out. Like, turn the tap on. We've got to break this old fashioned view of what it is or was to be a man. And I don't think it's better or worse, harder or easier than back in the day. It's just different. We're in a different world. We're in different times. So the tool needed sometimes is sitting with a friend, with another man, with someone you trust and crying, letting it out. It can still feel quite uncomfortable to do.
Yeah. I love that. Like, you wouldn't apologize for laughing. Why are you apologizing for crying? Whenever I see a man cry, like sometimes I'll watch. I'm a big fan of MMA also, so I watch a lot of like UFC and One Championship. Here in Asia, we have a lot more One Championship, and sometimes they're doing like a octagon interview or an interview in the ring, and you'll see, the guy start crying. And for me, I always want to pull out my phone and take a picture and like post it on my Instagram because I just think it's such a beautiful thing that we can see men crying and just owning it. And I wish more men got that message that it's okay.
Yeah, 100%. And, if it is this inherent feeling that it's weak and it's not a manly thing to do, when you see someone who's in MMA, who is this supposedly stereotypical tough guy crying, I think that can pave the way and break some of that. It doesn't matter if someone does boxing or belly dancing or poetry, fine arts or football, like we know that. But then seeing, like you said, someone in MMA crying, and there's been a few mental health related stories, like Paddy Pimblett went on and talked about losing his friend to suicide and cried. Then that can hopefully give other people, other men, not they should need it, the permission to cry. That it's okay. If they think it's not tough and there's supposedly tough guys crying, so maybe it is okay to do. But it's going to take a while to wind that back so that everyone knows it doesn't matter what you do, it's okay. It's being human to cry and let it out.
If someone's listening to this right now and they're struggling with their mental health and they don't know where to turn, what's like the first step you'd recommend?
I would, because you've got international listeners, right? We share resources that are international. I'd find a charity, an organization, a not-for-profit in that space that you think you're in, because you'll find anonymous groups on Zoom that are worldwide that will share a space for depression or anxiety or panic attacks or loss, grief and bereavement. So I think finding that group of people where you're not going to be judged, you can talk about what you're going through. And they're really powerful groups, this peer-to-peer support community. It depends where they're at, because it's always a good idea to check in with your GP, right? Medical professionals always want to be a part of your journey, because it depends where someone's at. But there's more to it than just, the medical route. You could join a community of a similar struggle, and that's what helped me. I want to talk about OCD mostly with the people who have got OCD, because I know they're not going to judge me. I know they've got this, they kind of get it. You can't teach someone what it's like to have OCD. You can, but if someone's got OCD, they know how it feels, they know the nature of the thoughts, even though the journeys might be different. So I'd say if someone's struggling with their mental health, go see the GP, check in with your medical professional. Absolutely always a good idea. But also find out which group speaks to you, because these charities will be started from a place of passion, not profit, and they'll share resources. A bit like, again, the podcast, you go on, you hear things, you connect, you go, oh, that sounds good, that speaks to me, let me take that part of my journey. And then you'll find something else, you go, right, that bit fits. So that would be my advice. Charities, and I never want to advise, remove the word advice, signpost, suggest, share. Find a group that works for you. Check in with your medical professional. Don't rely on any one thing. Just keep adding to your journey of recovery.
Well said. Yeah, I love that idea of, podcast. It's one of the reasons podcasts are just so beneficial, is hearing other people talk about something you've struggled with takes away so much of that feeling alone, feeling isolated. It's like, as you say with OCD, if you hear other people talking about their struggles, you just have that weight lifted off your shoulders. I'd love to know, I guess, just final kind of question is there something that you wish you could tell your younger self? Like, looking back on your journey, what do you wish you could tell your younger self?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's a big question. If I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would probably, I'd want to give him a hug, first of all. I want to put my arm around him and say, look, I'm here for you. It's okay. What you're going through is okay. You don't need to hide away, and you don't need to make this your reality of being told you're crazy, you're odd, you're weird, etc. So I'd say there's peace coming. It's a difficult transition at the minute because no one talks about this stuff, but you're going to be okay. And also I'd want to say, you don't need to go down this route of being the stereotypical tough guy, because sadly my head said to me, the only person that's going to fix you is you. Who's the stereotypical tough guy because I feel weak? Let me go and mirror that. Let me go and work on the door. Let me take steroids. Let me get covered in tattoos. Let me just create this false self, because I was repelling the world. I didn't want anyone ever to harm me or bully me again, but I wasn't happy. So I'd want to have a real good sit-down conversation with my younger self, and be lots to it. But first and foremost, just give him a hug and say, look, it's okay. Have a cry. It's fine. You feel this way. I got you.
We all need that message, I think. I mean, that's the message we need to be telling ourselves in our head every day. Like, to give ourselves that hug and say, hey, I've got you. I'm here for you.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's not something we're aware of, that self-compassion, not something that comes easily. We're good at putting ourselves last and just running on that sympathetic nervous system, that adrenaline. And actually, let's just stop and give ourselves some credit. We're doing well. Let's give ourselves some space, peace, and a hug.
Yeah. And, just to normalize for the guys listening to this right now, to honor and acknowledge that is so much easier said than done when you're feeling low about yourself. When you're in the midst of beating yourself up and thinking, I'm a horrible person, it's hard to give yourself that compassion. So, I think just whatever way you can find to connect with that. Well, one of the things that was helpful for me is just envisioning myself as a little boy, like envisioning the 10-year-old version of myself and saying, hey, I care about that version of myself. Even if feel like I'm a piece of shit now and just want to, criticize myself and judge myself, I can at least relate to my younger self and say, hey, I care about you. And I know that you went through some tough times.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, talk to yourself, try to talk to yourself as you talk to a friend. If a friend approaches you with a struggle and it's people you care about, you're not going to judge and condemn. And our own internal dialogue, that little voice in our heads can be quite cruel. So, switch it up. What would you say to a friend right now? Would you be saying these unkind, cruel things that you're saying to yourself? No, of course we wouldn't. Well, why does it only apply to people we care about? We've got to care about ourselves as well.
Yeah. Well, man, I really appreciate the work that you're doing in the world and the the example that you're setting for people out there. Where can people get in touch with you and find out more about your work?
Mostly Instagram. So it's voice underscore the number 4 underscore mental health. And then I've got a website, which is ridgewaymentalhealth.com. But mostly it's Instagram. It's just meeting people along the way. Thankfully, I'm feeling grateful to. I've had a business for 10 years teaching mental health support just through reputation of meeting great like-minded people. So yeah, if anyone wants to connect on any space, you just pop my name in and you'll find me come up.
Amazing, man. Well, once again, I appreciate you coming on the podcast today, and we'll definitely link all that stuff in the show notes. But thank you again for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me on, and keep up your great work. And I honestly mean this. I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't found your podcast. Back in 2022, there was that utopia moment of, wow, this makes sense. I found my group and people are talking about this. So thank you for doing what you do. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. All right, folks, that's it for today. We'll catch you guys on the next episode of Unhooked.